In this series, you're going to learn data analytics in a whole new light. And in today's episode, we're going to dive into grouping data as well as aggregating data using Pandas. I'm going to share all this with you guys through interactive lesson material as well as interactive code that I've put together for you guys to build on all your previous knowledge. If you've been wanting data analytics broken down to a level you can understand, you're in the right place. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back, guys, for another episode of Code with Josh. For obvious reasons, I'm Josh, and I'm stoked to have you guys here. Before I dive into the episode, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe, as that really does help me, a growing channel. I'm about to hit 10K, and with your help, I'm gonna get there a lot faster. And by the time you watch this video, I'm probably past 10K. Who knows? All right, so hit the like button, subscribe. That really does help me out, a growing channel. In today's episode, it's all about data analytics, and I'm building on our first part of the series. If you missed that video, I'm gonna link that somewhere here where I took you guys through data filtering and the basics to Pandas. Today, I wanna build on last week's episode, and I wanna introduce to you guys grouping data using group by and how we can aggregate our data using aggregate, all right? And to top it all off, the first link in the description, I have created some additional exercises outside of today's video that you guys can jump down to and try and use what we learn and solve those questions, right? Hopefully building on and reinforcing what we cover in the episode. All right, that's the first link in the description. And when you subscribe to my newsletter, my weekly Python newsletter, absolutely free, that's going to be in the welcome email. Okay, so I've included the data set as well as questions that you guys can work through to reinforce what we cover here today. All right, so all the links in the description, they're for you guys to help you out in your learning journey. And enough said, let's dive into why you're here. Part 2 of my mini series into data analytics, grouping data. Let's check it out. All right, here we are, guys, in the intro to data grouping, the next stage in our series. Now, remember, if you missed last week's episode, I linked that in the description. Okay, that was your introduction to Pandas, as well as an introduction to data filtering. Now, today's episode really focuses on grouping data and aggregating data, but I am going to use the filtering techniques we learned and build on that from the previous episode. All right, let's dive in and check it out. Now, what is the difference between data filtering and data grouping? Well, that's the first question we need to ask ourselves. Data filtering is what we focused on in last episode, and I hope you're feeling more confident with it. This is where we really search a data set for values that meet a condition. We are creating conditions in Pandas, and it's creating a new data frame from that. Right? The order doesn't change, and any data that doesn't meet your condition is not going to be a part of that new data frame. Okay, that's data filtering. Now, today is data grouping. So this is where we create groups based on a certain characteristic, or we could have multiple characteristics. And a data frame is converted into a small one, and it contains just general information about it. And within this new data group, we can actually add a new series of data, which is one of the challenges we're going to do here today together. Okay, so I created a visual for you because this is how my brain works too. Okay, so really grouping is a way to process our data in which the data is combined into groups based on one or more characteristics. So imagine if we have a large data set and it starts here, right? This is like all app users. It could be 100,000 users. Well, that's a lot of people, right? Maybe I want to categorize them in order to find more specific details about them. So I could begin maybe by grouping by gender, right? That would narrow it down quite a lot. I can break it into 2 groups. And then, for example, if I take the male group, I could then create subgroups or groups within that. I could even go into age, right? So I'm creating a group of, for example, 20-year-olds who are males within all the app users. So I'm getting very specific. Okay, this is not a filter. This is creating groups. And then once I have a group, I could apply a filter on that if I wanted to, or vice versa. All right, so this is that visualization. So let's look at what this looks like when we use code and our syntax for that. So here we go. Now remember that group by, okay, that's what we're talking about, grouping. And this Pandas function we're going to be using is called group by. And this allows us to group data by characteristics and calculate statistics for this newly created grouped data. Okay, so if you imagine here, I am creating, here is a data frame. Okay, here's going to be my grouped data. And I'm tapping into the data frame that we loaded, usually a CSV file, and we're going to group by. Okay, so what am I going to group by? All right, so it could be age, gender, population, right? It could be anything. So if I go back very quickly, in this example, I could group by gender, I could group by age, right? Depending on the data that we're working with. Today is a little bit different, okay, based on the data set that I have for us, all right? But here is where we put the name of the column to group by. Now, if we're only grouping by one thing, we do not need to say by equals, this keyword argument, okay? But this will come into play when we are going to group by multiple characteristics. Okay, so we put the name of the column we want to group by, and then once we have this new group, for example, male and female, then I could apply a column that I want to filter by, or maybe a condition with that. All right, so pause the video if you need to. Right, this is the name of our column. This is the name of the column to filter by once we have the groups. Now, something you're going to see me use today in the episode is reset index. This is a very common method that we should be using, and this is used to literally reset the index of a data frame. Now, remember that each series of data starts with an index. So, for example, if we think of the series as the row, right? The first row is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. This allows us to reset the index, turning the index into a column, and it creates a new default index. Okay, this is very important, especially if we're working with group by. Okay, so let's take a look at an example I put together. Here we go. This is a preview of the data we're going to be working with, and I'm going to use the data that I used in the last episode, all right, so we can hopefully build on that together. Now, here is my grouping, okay? So I am grouping by the country. So I've created groups of all the countries, right? Japan, India, Vietnam, Mexico, okay? They each have their own group. Now I could get the average growth of each of those countries. So I take my grouped data and I can target. I'm applying a filter onto that. So I want to get the growth rate of each country and I want to calculate the mean of that. What do you think it's going to print off, right? What might that look like? Well, it's going to look something like this, okay? You can see that my group is right here. I said country, here is our country. So I have a list of countries. And then the output, right, this is the mean, our growth rate. This isn't all the countries. You can see the 3 dots here, right? There's too many to count, right? But these are the first 5 and the last 5 of this newly created grouping, this data frame here, okay? Now, this is only one country, or excuse me, this is only one group. What if I want to group by multiple characteristics? This is where the by parameter comes into play. So I can use that. But this time, I want to group by country first, and then within the country group, I want to group by city, right? So it's important what comes first here. Okay, so for example, on my list here, I see 2 from China. So I'm going to use that as the example, right? So I have China, and then within China, I'm going to have Shanghai and Beijing and any other city in China. So I'm creating a group within a group. Now that we have those groups, I can apply a filter. So I want to get the population, and we want to get the sum of that. Now you can see how organized the data is, right? So I begin with country because that was our first argument, and then with city, right? So it goes country, Afghanistan, well, only Kabul. Okay, so let's use, I guess, Algeria, right? It's going in alphabetical, okay? There are 2 cities in Algeria that are in my list. Then we're calculating the sum. So here is the population of the city. Here's the population of that city. So look how structured we can get our data. Okay, you can group by one group, or we can create subgroups, groups within groups, to really analyze our data more efficiently. All right, let's jump over to VS Code and let's go through some of these scenarios I've put together for you guys. All right, so I'm in VS Code, okay? I've already created my data frame and I'm inspecting that data frame. Okay, so I'm gonna run this quickly here and I'm gonna show you the data as well as the CSV file. Now guys, I've created 6 scenarios here today. Remember, if you head onto the link in the description, that's my newsletter, you can join for free, okay? And when you join, I've created other scenarios for you guys that you can practice at home using this, okay? It's a great tool to continue practicing what we're learning. So these are all the scenarios, but I'm getting the basic info as well as the head and tail, the first 5 and the last 5. Okay, so we can see what you're working with here. Okay, the first one is our index. Remember, reset index? This is that. A city, country, the population for the last 2 years, and the growth rate. As well as we can see each data type of that. So integers, objects, which is just text. We learned that in the previous episode, as well as floats. And then we can see here, just to get a brief overview, okay, this is what our data frame looks like, and start to think, how can we approach this? All right. So I'm going to trash the terminal. I'm going to give space. I just want you to focus on one scenario at a time. I have a question here, and then I have a hint if you need it. So I want to find how many cities are there in each country. Okay, so think about that. How can we approach that? Well, we want to group, and I want to count the cities. Okay, so let's make a group. I'm going to call like a country group. Take our data frame. We can use group by, right? And inside group by, what are we grouping by? Well, I want to group by the country. Now, if I go back here to my data set, this is what it looks like. Okay, this is also linked in the description. All right, and you can get the same thing that was on Kaggle, tomato, Kaggle for free. All right, and you can see my headers, my categories, and then all the data. So I'm going to group by country, right? And then what do I want to get for each country? Well, I need to apply a filter. So let's say the city. Now, okay, how do I count the number of cities? Well, with the Python function, count. That's it. We have just answered that. I'm going to say total, and inside here, let's just say country group. Okay, let's run our code. Let's check the output. Voila, there you go. So remember, we can't see everything. Okay, if you want to go through those, you can. This is just showing me the head and the tail because there's so many. But you can see within that, okay, I could apply multiple conditions to then narrow down more data. But for example, Venezuela, there are 8 cities that are in this data set. Vietnam has 6. Yemen has 5. Okay, so we just answered how many cities are there in each country. Now, in the real world, there's more cities, but in this data set, that's how many each country has. Okay, great. I'm going to keep the code. I'm going to turn off print so we can just focus on one scenario at a time. All right. Now, our next question. I want you to pause the video and try it on your own. Okay. What is the average population for each country in 2024? How are we going to approach that? Well, I'm going to create one called average population. Let's take our data frame and let's apply group by. Okay. We are going to group by again. What do you think? Well, country. Okay. What is the filter going to be? Well, if we check our data set, we have 2 populations. I want population of 2024 because that's the question I asked you, right? All right, so how do we get the average? Well, we're going to apply mean. Great, that's it. Let's print it off. I'm going to say here average, and we are going to say average pop. All right, check your code, check your findings. Is it what you expected? Cool, there you go. Now you're seeing this weird decimal number. Okay, this represents million. So the total population in Afghanistan is 4.72 million. Moving on. Okay, turning it off. What is our next scenario? So our question, what is the total growth rate for each country? All right, so group by country and calculate the total growth rate. So I'm going to change this, right? So what is the total growth rate? I only want a positive growth, right? Because we don't really care if a country's going down. I'm sorry, Japan, right? We don't want that. So I'm going to first begin by applying a filter. So let's be like growing countries. Okay, so I'm going to apply a filter. We learned this in last episode. Let's take our data frame and let's apply a condition. So what condition do we want? Well, I'm going to target the growth rate. This is one of the headers in our data file. And I'm going to say anywhere the growth rate is greater than 0. So now I have a new data frame. Okay, so I'm going to take this to answer the next question. Let's say country growth. This is going to be equal. So let's take our data frame. This is the new data frame we just filtered out. And we're going to say group by. Right? What are we going to group by? Well, once again, I don't have to put by here. Okay, I'm just going to say country. Okay, I'm grouping by the country of the filtered data. And of this now, I will then again get the growth rate. Okay, what do we want from this? We want the sum. Now, I've applied a filter. I've been using group by a few times. What is a way for us to reset the index so it's not changing everything? What did I talk about in the lesson? I'm just going to link here at the end, reset index. Okay, that's a good tool. If I go back here, right, I have this extension turned on. This is a really good extension. It's explaining what each function does. This works for anything. Okay, so this is useful when the index needs to be treated as a column or when the index is meaningless and needs to be reset to the default before another operation. Okay, so using that with group by here. If we come down here and I print off my country growth, okay, you can run your code, check your findings. There we go. And you can see country growth rate. This is the column we targeted, and you can see what's on the up and up. So for number 4, what is the average population for each combination of growth, and this should be growth rate, in 2024? We want to group by country and growth rate. So we're doing more than just one here. Okay, so I'm going to say average population growth. I can say that. Okay, let's take our data frame and we are going to group by. Now, this time, remember, we are creating a group within a group. So I'm going to say by equals a list. What is the first thing that we're grouping by? The country. Then what is the subgroup? The subgroup is going to be our growth rate. Okay, so we're grouping by 2 things here. Now I can apply a filter. So I said the population of 2024. So population, okay, let's get the average. And then we're grouping a lot here, so I'm going to reset index. Okay, that's done in one line here. So I'm going to print total again for our readability. And let's drop in this newly created data we have here. So average pop growth. Okay, so now we're grouping by multiple things. We have a child group within that, and then applying our filter to get the average population for each combination. Okay, so look at the difference in how that outputted. You can see that here's total index. Here is our country, the growth rate, as well as the population. Okay. This is really handy. Now we're grouping by multiple things. It's more readable. It's easier to see what's happening here. Okay. This is really great. Okay. And you can see here too. So I didn't group by city, right? So Algeria had 2 cities in there. That's why it's appearing 2 times, okay? Yemen had more than 1 in there. That's why it's appearing 2 times here. And let's jump back in so we can talk about the next section. We've covered here grouping data. I want to talk about something called aggregation. Now that you've wrapped your head around group by and how we can group data, I want to introduce you to the next topic in this series, which is aggregate data. Now, really what this means is you can apply multiple functions at the same time onto a data frame, onto your filtered data or onto your grouped data. And Pandas has a really handy method that we can use for this, okay, which is aggregate. Okay, and as I mentioned, this just allows you to apply multiple functions at the same time. Now, I've listed 3 commands here. Okay, so I'm going to actually draw on the screen. The first 2 are the exact same thing. All right, so we have aggregate and we have ag. Ag is just the shorthand for aggregate. So you might see both of these. Feel free to use either one. Okay, but previously we were just applying one method. Mean, sum, max, min. But now I can do all that in the same line. I don't need multiple lines to find the output I'm looking for. Aggregate takes a list, and inside as a string, we put the name of the function. We don't need the parentheses, it's just the name of the function. So for example, max, min, mean. And these are all going to be applied at the same time. Okay, so now these are using Python built-in functions. Okay, and remember that these 2 are working together. It's the same thing, right? But sometimes you want to apply a custom function. You make a function that you can then apply on this data. That is where apply comes into play. And the final bonus challenge I have today is going to require you to make a function and apply that onto your grouped data. So if you make a function, I'm going to use apply, and I put the name of your function here. No parentheses needed. If you're using built-in Python functions, I'm going to go right here. Okay. Now let's look at a few of these in action. Okay. So here I'm building on the previous example. Right, so I've grouped by country, and then within the country, I'm grouping by cities. Now that I have my group data frame, I want to target the population of each city within a country. And for the population, I want to get all this data, the minimum city, essentially, the maximum, and the mean. What might our output look like here? Well, it's going to look something like this. Look how neatly that is organized too. Okay, so for all of these, you can see the min, mean, and max. So now, ideally, right, I'm using a data set that's using cities. So you can see if I'm grouping by both of these, okay, then, I mean, it's going to have the same numbers, okay, because the min is also the max of the city in this country. If we had only grouped by country, then at that state, we would be able to see the min of that country, the max of the country, as well as the mean. All right, let's jump into VS Code. Let's put aggregate to use with our bonus scenarios. All right, in the final 2 scenarios, we are going to use aggregate to get multiple findings at once. And then I want us to build our own function that we can then apply on the data frame. Okay? So let's start with scenario number 5. What are the summary statistics for the population in 2024 for each country? So I want to give the average, the sum, the max, and the min. How are we going to do this? All right, I'm going to group by country and then get the aggregation for it. So I'm going to create here country stats. And what I can do is I can take our data frame. We are going to group by. What do we want to group by? The country. Okay. What is the filter? Well, our population. And we're going to do the 2024 population again. Now I can apply aggregate to this, right? So I could say ag. Okay. I'm going to say aggregate okay, for readability to help you guys remember. And inside here, I'm going to just apply the functions as a string. So I want to get the mean. I would like to get the sum. I would like to get the max. And then finally the min, all at the same time. Now, when I print off my country statistics, we are going to see that applied all at the same time. So this makes everything faster. It's less redundant. If I know what I'm looking for, we can just apply those functions here onto our data group. And you can see, right, our countries, right, they're always alphabeticalized here. But you can see I have the mean, the sum, the max, and the min, okay? And these two numbers correspond together, right? And for example, Afghanistan only has one city, right? But if we look here at like Argentina, okay, you can see that the biggest city has this data and the smallest city has this because we have our max and our min. So we can now do this simultaneously to speed up the whole process. All right. Great, guys. Guys, if you have any questions, drop comments. Let me know your thoughts. If you're enjoying this content, really, that helps me out by you hitting that like button and subscribing. All right, I have weekly content coming out. This is all a part of this new series I'm trying to put together for you guys to help break it down. So hit that like button and subscribe, and let's get into our final scenario. So for our final scenario, no, this is not, I actually just did that. No, I changed the question. Now, this better suits what I had, okay? What is the average population for each combination of country and the growth category? So, Josh, you didn't make a growth category. That's right. So remember that we can actually, once we group data, I can create a new series of data within that group, so a new column. So for example, what we're going to do is I want to have a new rating. I could have a country that has a high growth, I'm going to put here moderate growth, or a negative growth. Okay, so I'm going to create a new column within my group data, and for each country, I'm going to assign what it has to it. So let's create a function, all right? I'm going to create a function for, let's say, a growth category, okay? This is going to take some type of growth, right, which is a decimal number. That's our percentage, right? And we can say if the growth is greater than 0.02, let's then just return for that column and let's say high growth. Let's say if the growth is only greater than 0, okay, if that's the case, we are just going to say moderate growth. Nothing too special, okay, moderate growth. And finally, anything else, if it's not above 0, then that's not good. That's a declining country. We are going to say negative growth. Okay, so if you imagine, I am going to give this function a decimal number. It's going to be this growth rate. So boom, right here, Japan. Okay, if I give it this, I'm going to create a new column, a new series, and Japan would then have negative growth. Okay, so it's going to go through and it's going to apply this function to each row in my data. So if I go down, I have this function now. I'm going to create a new series, a new column. So what do I want to call that, right? Remember, this is like a dictionary key in Python. So if I were to add a new key value pair, and you can actually see on the screen, it says dictionary key. That's ironic. What do I want to call it? I'm going to say growth category. Okay, what is the value for this? Well, df, we are going to give the growth rate, and we are going to give it to my function, growth category, just like so. Okay, so every row is being applied to that. In growth category here, this is a new series, a new column within our grouped data. All right, so now I have this new column. right? I want to get the average population for each combination. So let me come down here and let's create growth count. And let's take our data frame. Let's group by. What do we want to group by here? Well, I want to group by country. And then my new column. Okay, so because now I have a new column, I can say growth category, like so. We have a new column we just made here in the previous line. So I'm grouping by country, then we're grouping by the growth category. I'm going to target that. I'm going to apply the filter for each city, and we want to count. How many are there? Okay, let's end that off by printing off our growth. What did I call that? Growth count. Okay, and let's see our findings, all right? Scenario 6, we built a function out. We created a new series of data within the group data, and then we're counting that. Boom, look at that. Okay, voila. So you can see, right, Vietnam, because the cities average that, it has a high growth, okay? It's consistently climbing, and we've created this new series of data. Guys, that is absolutely amazing. Well done. Congrats, guys! A new topic for data analytics has been covered in part 2 of this series. If you enjoyed today's content, don't consider, hit that like button, all right? That's going to hurt my feelings, right? And then consider subscribing if you got value in this content. All right, head on over to the channel. I have weekly content coming out dedicated to you guys and helping you understand Python and topics surrounding Python in a new light. All right, and remember, all those additional questions you can use to test to see what you learned today, that's the link in the description. All right, that's with my free newsletter. Consider joining. All right, subscribe to that. That really does help me reach more students around the world. All right, drop a comment. What did you guys find difficult in today's episode? Or what do you guys want to see as I move through this new series? All right, there's a whole lot to cover, and I want to make sure that you guys are heard. So until next week's episode, guys, I will see you then.